So we've spent the better half of the day talking about the progress on the creation of an electronic data network to advance regulatory science, about the importance of patient input and getting products to market sooner, about the importance of sharing insights, best practices, and learnings in cybersecurity, the need to collaborate across regulators. In short, we've been talking about what we believe are components of a learning healthcare system. And a key attribute to empowering such a system that maximizes the benefits and minimizes the risks of device use is transparency. So what we hope to do over the next 40 minutes or so is talk about the role of transparency in medical device lifecycle management, all the way from clinical trial data access to leveraging it or leveraging real-world data in active safety surveillance and device quality. Now, I have a bunch of questions prepared, and I'm moderating this panel and also double-hatting and being the industry representative. But considering we're late into the afternoon and probably those hormones are settling in and you're beginning to feel a little drowsy, I encourage you to raise your hand and ask questions as we go along and not wait till the end. So in that spirit, Harlan, I'm going to start this discussion with you. And 4 parts to the question. What role do you see for industry, academia, and sponsors in sharing data with other researchers? Have you seen where it has been done effectively? And perhaps most importantly, why be transparent?
Thanks, JiJo, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm an academic. I'm a professor at Yale, but I've had the pleasure of working in many different roles on the governing committee of NEST and working with FDA, working with industry, working with my colleagues, working on behalf of patients and with patients. I want to say that here's a central premise. We're not moving fast enough. We're not putting people in industry in a position where they can iterate on what they're doing fast enough. We're not learning well enough. When we come out with products, they're not perfect, but we need to be able to learn from them. And in order to be able to do that, we need data. Data needs to be able to move. We also need to, most importantly, generate trust within the infrastructure among the various actors within this. I've had firsthand where I've witnessed people at the FDA, the remarkable professionals who dig deep into the information that they're presented. I've had the pleasure of working with people in industry as they're trying to develop new products and struggle through the risks that are necessary to take, the advances in all the different aspects from the original idea through the manufacturing, through the testing, and then its ultimate use in practice, where the very best device still can be misused if it's not being implemented properly. On the academic side, I've seen people try to study this carefully and understand it, but I've seen also within our communities polarization, where we aren't actually aligned necessarily always in the best interest of patients as we sort of go off in our different camps. That mistrust then leads to, I think, is an impediment to progress. Because what's important here is that we're able to develop a means by which we can fully collaborate with each other on what's best for society and what's best for the patients that we ultimately are seeking to promote their interests. And getting back to your point about transparency, we have issues within the research community around the reproducibility of science, the trustworthiness of it. You're going to talk about the issue of publication bias, where some people have an agenda in any of these communities, academia, industry, wherever, where the whole picture isn't necessarily revealed. FDA people are put in a position where they have to dig through and try to understand data and the quality of its collection, but it's not always apparent. I believe we need to march to an era where we're willing to be much more transparent in the science. We're willing to share data in ways that both safeguard the proprietary interests of the companies, but enable science to be able to be viewed more broadly by the larger community and reused in ways that are going to advance our knowledge. I believe that with regard to the post-market world, we need to be able to enlist patients as partners in the research. We need to help them gain agency over the data. Only the patients can pull together the data that show the real story of their journey with health. Only the patients can be in a position where data that sits in disparate places can be brought together under their umbrella and then synchronized with research databases in ways we can learn. That sharing by patients is also an important feature of what this kind of transparency is. But whoever's going to use that data, we have to be worthy of the trust that's generated. So we need to set rules and guidelines by which data can flow. People's natural reaction is to try to sequester the data, hold it tight, not let others look at it. And I believe that the path to the future is to find ways that we can get behind where we can safeguard against adverse consequences, but promote the very best uses of shared data. We've done this with J&J. Yale has the Yale Open Data Access Project, where J&J has deposited all their clinical trials, de-identified and available for people to use. We have scores of people who have requested the data. We have many publications that have accrued in knowledge that's advanced because of that sharing. And I believe that there's been reputational gain by J&J by taking the high ground on that kind of sharing. But it's not simply symbolic. I think that we have to embrace an era where we're all going to come together. We're going to be able to set the guide rules, and we're going to say that transparency has got to be the key to the future, to both enable people within industry to iterate faster, learn faster, and have the trust so they can move to clearance or approval and then payment quickly, and then know that even in the life cycle, they're going to continue to improve. We need patients part of that. We need academics part of that.
Thanks, Harlan. And again, as we look at this whole issue of data transparency, there are other industries where they've taken the first step, most notably in aviation, where pilots share close call data without any fear of being penalized for having done that. And it's shared in a de-identified manner so that others could gain from that experience. So Heather, if you could talk a little bit about what drove that, what were some of the hurdles, and how is that applicable to our industry as well?
Thanks, JiJo. Happy to do so. Good afternoon. I hope everybody's staying awake and enjoyed the truffles that were out there. Pamela, those are dangerous. So if you take your mind back to the 1990s, there were two significant aviation events. One was TWA 800, and one was the Value Jet in the Everglades of Florida. Those were significantly bad aviation events, for those of you who are young enough to remember them. And they triggered a move on the part of the federal government to form what's called the CAST. And the CAST is a federally run effort that takes a forensic approach to aviation accidents. In about the early 2000s, around 2007, the skies were getting safer and safer. And we realized that we needed to move to a proactive method of ensuring safety for our airways. So MITRE partnered, and I work for MITRE, which operates 7 FFRDCs, one of which is the HHS FFRDC. And through that one, we work with FDA and other OpDivs and staff divs across HHS. But one of our FFRDCs is with FAA. So in 2007, we started what's called the ASIAS, and that's the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing. And that is, and by the way, if you ask me that acronym tomorrow, I will not remember it, because to me it's ASIAS. I made sure I knew the words today so I could say it to you. So in 2007, we started with about 7 airlines. And we had a fairly bold proposition for them, and that was, we are a systems engineering firm with many, many disciplines, many experts in a wide array of disciplines at our disposal. And we said, if you share your data with us, we will keep it safe, and we will aggregate it. We will do the analysis for you. We will aggregate it, and we will share that information back for you to use. You will have access to your own data, so you'll be able to compare your airline against the aggregate. And we can do studies, and we can help make the skies even safer. So it's grown rapidly. We now not only have commercial aviation, we also have general aviation. So it's not just Southwest and United and American, it's also FedEx and UPS and others like that who carry our packages for holidays and such. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to identify trends in the data that we share back with the industry. And the industry now includes not just airlines, but also avionics, airplane manufacturers, and the like. And what we are able to do is we conduct what's called data fusion. So we take all of this data, we keep it all very safe, And it's a variety of data. So we get airline information, we get safety incident reports, we get all of the air traffic controller information, we get the radar information, we get weather information. And we're able to fuse all of that together to give them a very, very rich, contextualized picture of what's going on in the skies and what's almost going on in the skies. Because as you all know, we actually have a fairly safe airspace at this point in time. But there are near misses, and there are also things that are generally not known to the public that are disconcerting for those of you who are flying. You're all safe. And it's all good. You're safer in an airplane than you are in the beltway. We all know that. So be more nervous in your car than on your plane. But this information has had direct impact on policies. It also has had direct impact on the design of airports. So especially in metroplexes, there's been quite a bit of change as a result of the analysis that we've been able to do. Harlan's point about trust is key. So and I would say there are 4 things that I've really taken from the SIS work. There's really trust and transparency is absolutely essential. So is collaboration and compromise. So we have many experts at MITRE who are not only data experts, but also aviation experts, but the airlines are the ones who have the pilots getting in the cockpits every day. So we're able to pull this information together and reflect it back to them, but we rely on working with the pilots to do some of the root cause analysis. Now, it's our belief that this is directly translatable into the medical device arena. There are devices on airplanes. Pilots are actually, I don't remember whether it was Pam or Liz, I think it was Liz, who asked me, well, what's the patient equivalent in the aviation space? And I said, well, the patient equivalent in the aviation space, in the SIS space, really is the pilot. Because pilots literally have skin in the game. If there is an accident, they're the first ones on the scene. So working with the pilots is the equivalent to working with the patients. And some of the things that we've seen, those of you who are providers will recognize this one, pilots suffer from alarm fatigue. And one of the things we were able to do with the analysis was we were able to determine how we could change things, change the thresholds for certain sensors so that there would be fewer alarms. We're able to see how things work together better with that data fusion. And the one last thing I would say that's key for those of you in the device space is we also have done epidemiological studies within data sets. And I have a great deal of respect for all EPIs and for anybody who does data curation work. The reality is the challenge of doing an epidemiological study in one data source or in a set of data, different data sets that come from a single entity, is not as challenging as working across multiple data sets. When we talk about data, we talk about velocity, we talk about volume, we also talk about variety. And one of the challenges that we had to tackle early on, we thought naively back in 2007 that we could get everybody to agree to a standard. That just didn't happen, it wasn't practicable. So one of the key things that MITRE does is it takes in all of this data that has such great variety and we standardize it. Some people refer to that as data janitorial work. I refer to it as magic. I'm glad other people do it because it's hard. And so that's something that you will be facing because the medical device industry has so many different companies that there is going to be a wealth of variety in terms of the data sets that come in. So that's going to be a key thing. So trust, transparency, compromise, collaboration, and also having some pretty significant systems engineering skills behind the hood in order to be able to bring everything in.
Thanks. So following up on that, Jeff, where do you feel public health could have been benefited had there been greater transparency? Or maybe a better way of asking that is, what are some of the challenges you as a regulator face on a day-to-day basis that could be better addressed had there been, or if there were better transparency with the availability of data? And the second part to that is, if you did actually play the lotto and win a magic wand, how would you structure the environment so that we could safely share this data?
So a big challenge for us is the data we receive today on safety and quality problems, essentially the lifeblood of post-market surveillance, is derived from a punitive model. I mean, it's essentially give us your data, report certain problems, or else you'll get a warning letter love note from us. And then we'll take increasingly more aggressive actions if necessary. And yet other sectors of the U.S. economy have realized that a far more effective approach is a mixture of carrots and sticks. In particular, the opportunity to report problems without recrimination unless it's warranted. And we're not talking about a get out of jail free pass. It's about upping your game and achieving excellence. And unfortunately, under our carry a big stick model, we don't get the range of data we truly should have to be able to apply advanced analytics to more quickly identify, address, and share common problems across a type of technology, across a subsector in industry. And so we really do need to explore those successful approaches that have been used by other sectors in the economy, like aviation, to understand what has worked, what hasn't worked, and why, and what can and should be either adopted or adapted for the medical device sector. I were applying a magic wand, some of the top things I'd be thinking about is you need a safe space or sanctuary for all the parties involved, not just those who may be reporting problems. It's for those dealing with it too, like the FDA, right? Because if we're going to do this and we're going to start maybe looking at data otherwise we wouldn't have access to, you have to have that opportunity to work it through. But the second is the rules of the road around communication, because it's not about staying silent. It's about then reporting out the right information at the right time, and we have to have a common framework to do that.
And thank you so much for that, because again, as an example, we at J&J just recently experimented, I shouldn't say experimented, went beyond that, in exploring that safe space when in one of our pharmaceutical trials, we picked up a safety signal that couldn't be explained. And we said, okay, let's try and figure out. We didn't see that signal with any of the other drugs within that class and wanted to better understand what was behind that, what was the root cause. And we decided to go with observational data. But this time around, we did something a little different for the first time. Number one, we published our protocol on clinicaltrials.gov. We actually published every version of the protocol that we negotiated with the regulator, so there was transparency. Number two, we published all our analytical methodology using Odyssey. Number three, all the data that was generated was also de-identified and published. So again, we experimented with a different way of doing things, and I can say it's helpful when results are positive and the results support your product. But in this case, it was also helpful because it ensured that there was transparency that kept us away from being accused of cherry-picking data, that kept us away from being accused of any kind of bias, and it provided credibility for what we were doing. Now, was this easy? No. Patient safety is always first, and that's a given. But it required a tremendous cultural change within the organization to be willing to take that level of risk. And I think that's something that we need to collectively think about and figure out how we can use these examples to actually advance the science and provide better access, and not just better access, provide safer products to our patients. Kind of moving on from there onto the topic of randomized clinical trials and the fact that in the device world, robust clinical trials in surgery do not necessarily translate into the same outcomes when you look through the lens of real-world data. And this question is both to Harlan and to Jeff. Jeff, your point of view on improving transparency in surgical outcomes and what impact you expect UDI to have on that?
So I think it's a good thing. I just have one word for that: nest. Leave it at that. And UDI is an incorporation of UDI in electronic health information. Again, absolutely critical, because you got to know what technology was used in which patient. And
Harlan, the question for you is, how do you think transparency around real-world data is going to impact healthcare?
Well, here's a dream for the future, which is that actually there are no, the plaintiff lawyers go away. There's no plaintiff lawyers. There's no suits about failure to warn or negligence. And I say that because everyone who puts out a new product is under the cloud of what's going on as data comes in. Is it going to be used against us? They need to recognize that every signal isn't a true signal. There's going to be false signals. You're constantly trying to make decisions about, is this real or not? We've got a product that we believe is helping a lot of people. There's some information coming forward. It's got to be, in a way, adjudicated. People need to be able to look at it in a fair and impartial way to try to understand what it means. And if we advance, we will develop the means by which data is streaming in. Not intermittent case report forms, not numerator data in MAUDE, but data that's streaming in from real world, where we'll be able to look with FDA, with companies, with patient representatives, and and academics, trying to parse through exactly what it means. But we'll be willing to be transparent about what's coming in, what it could mean, what we should be doing about it to both either prove or disprove the signal, or just reassure people, and also get information that's going to help people iterate. I mean, I led with this issue about the plaintiffs just because I'm saying that the notion is that we would be able to bring better trust to the system, that all the information that's being learned is able to be shared and commonly understood, and we're not overreacting or underreacting. We're basically trying to learn what exactly actions are necessary given what is coming in. And I think this kind of transparency will actually unleash innovation, will help us move faster, and will take away some of these clouds of like people saying that data is being held back, or that we're not really learning what's going on, or when there is an issue, we need to be able to hold hands together and be able to understand it. And as long as it's sort of behind the curtain, there's always this question of, well, what do people know when, and should we be doing something different than what we're doing? And there's always going to be a bit of uncertainty about it, but I think we need to work together to create that safe space where data's coming in, and we're all working together to try to understand what it means. And that's a very different model than what exists right now. And one of the big reasons for NEST is that this numerator data is not serving anyone. It's taking a lot of resources. It's producing data that we really can't interpret in terms of what it means. We don't have any understanding about rates. And especially when you're talking about devices, it can sometimes be the way it's implemented, that there's the way in which the device is being implanted, or how it's being monitored, or what happened in the site. We need that kind of granular data about exactly what device is it, what lot was it created in, who's using it, and what are the outcomes that are accruing. And we need to be able to, I believe everyone who gets a device should join a community of people whose data is being aggregated, understood, leveraged, and used to improve our practice. And to get there, that data needs to be in a place where also groups can impartially look at it, and safely, everyone feels safe, and that trust to be able to figure out how we move forward.
I don't know, Heather, if you want to comment on that, because, again, I think one of the key aspects, both with the work that Harlan has done at Yale and the work that you're doing, is the availability of this independent third party who can help adjudicate the data, and how that protects the participants involved. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure, especially since Jeff mentioned something about the safe space. I think one of the key elements of the ASIAS model that would be needed in order to make a medical device ASIAS successful is the legal protection that we have wrapped around ASIAS. There have been attempts to depose the data from ASIAS by plaintiffs, and we have successfully rebuffed those attempts on numerous occasions. Nobody has ever successfully been able to depose our data. So that's a critical thing to think about when one pictures this future, which I agree. I mean, it would be great if we could have a national system, a medical device equivalent for ASIAS across the whole nation, because then we would be able to remove the factors of, is there a particular clinic in, say, South LA that maybe isn't as successful with a particular medical device, and so maybe it looks sketchy from that particular place, but then when you look at the whole nation, you can see it's not the medical device. And then as a community, you can zoom in on, well, maybe there's something about the protocol that's taking place in that area, and you can, as a community, you can reach into them and help them learn from what people in the Northeast Corridor are doing.
And if it is that site, we can figure out how do you make that site better,
exactly,
or they shouldn't use it. And if it is the device, we should learn really quickly.
Exactly.
Okay, there was something unexpected because, it passed, it was cleared. It's out there. We've learned something rapidly. And the community is going. I think the other thing is right now, the responsibility is wholly on the company almost to be able to be forthcoming instead of creating this sort of safe space where we're all working together to try to understand whatever data is coming in to help guide decisions that are going to be made subsequently. And I think that sort of collaboration it's an aspiration. What you've created is that sort of safe space where that collaboration can be, fostered.
Well, and there's another aspect to consider as well, and that's so for medical device manufacturers, very few of you are generating all of the parts of the medical device. So there is an element in the future vision where, as a medical device manufacturer, you could start seeing some things with what you mentioned with the different lot numbers. You might know that you shifted a material and it seemed like it was an equivalent material. You shifted from material A to material B on a given medical device class. And if you start seeing problems, you might be able to do further analysis and see that it's the material. And if you switch from one material to another, then you resolve the issues.
And increasingly, it could be the software. I mean, it's not just the materials, or the software worked at one point in time, but it's no longer as effective because it hasn't been recalibrated or updated. I mean, there's so many different features to this that we don't want to give up on what could be something successful, but we want to be able to pinpoint where's the issue here that needs to be improved. This is, I think, what the point about the transparency, which is can we work together to figure out what's going on together so that, again, we protect the interests of everyone and in the end contribute mostly to the interests of society and patients.
I just wanted to pause out there and see if there were any audience questions or comments.
Get your microphone.
We've talked a lot about UDI. FDA requires device companies to do it, but we can't get to where the hospitals use it. Can we cooperate with, Medicare and Medicaid, because they've got a hammer that they can require them to use it? Can we get that sort of cooperation over there? Has there been conversation? Is there resistance? Second part there, I think it's we heard about sort of the commoditization of with Amazon this morning, but the second part of that is the more you get there, and with the new shift in policies where companies can buy law firms, and that business that we have of model district litigation is just a business proposition. They get as many patients as they can, and et cetera. But now that they can buy law firms, we're going to see more and more of that. And FDA is the prime source of information to start the litigation. So, the collection of data is one question. You get the UDI, but it also leads you to more information gathered by FDA, which leads to more litigation. So I'd like to have your sort of thoughts on that.
And I think we have to end the session at 5 o'clock today, so I just want to make sure we do have a time limit here, Steve. So in terms of then adoption of UDI into electronic health information sources, you're saying we can require manufacturers to put in their labeling occasionally on the product itself. So from a CMS, I'll say a payer standpoint, we have been working through a process, the ASC X12, in trying to get that incorporated into claims forms. And that process is getting close to at least finishing up through X12, and then it goes through another few rounds. So it is possible we will see a change in the future where payers will have that incorporated into payer claims. For EHRs, other sources, we now have what we call the Learning UDI community, which involves healthcare facilities, systems, and others in the distribution chain who are participating about figuring out the best ways and best practices for adoption and incorporation of UDI in those information sources. And we now have over 200 hospitals who are moving forward to adopt UDI. So we're starting to make some good progress there. And I think as we see those institutions do that and adopt, we'll get to a tipping point, and everyone else will. And I think from the session just recently on Nest 2, starting to hear from some of the systems about the value of real-world evidence as they're starting to realize and why participation in Nest is important. What's a little bit behind it is the added value when you have UDI. It's going to make it a lot easier to use that information. What about litigation?
Let me just say one other thing about that, Jeff. So I think you guys have been doing great work to push this. It's an idea that, I mean, it makes so much sense. It's hard to see what the resistance is, but it's a lot of inertia. Another angle on this is to push it on the patient side. We've been saying every patient should have the UDIs for every implanted device. So they go to an emergency department, immediately someone can scan and know exactly what it is that someone's got inside them, because often people can't tell exactly what that is and what people are going to need to do with it. So I think we also, need to be advocating. If that's true, then it needs to be in the EHR. People need to be able to have access to the UDIs that are in their body, that mark the devices that are in the body, and it's just another direction that I think should add fuel to the work that says, why this is necessary.
Yeah, no, I agree. The litigation side, so guess what? You're at risk anyway. Lawyers are going to be coming for you. Yes, the device industry is probably the next big target, you'll see from trial lawyers. The answer is not to hide your data. I would say quite the opposite. It is, how do we have a system where we are identifying problems, getting on top of them quickly so there's fewer patient exposures. And in fact, if we better understand what may be the risks, we can then share that learning in the industry and prevent them. That is your best way. And I do think under a system, and we are talking about a different kind of model here. If we move over to something like aviation, it is a different kind of model. We might need even statutory changes to really make it work. Those should be on the table. We have a different system, too, about expectations on communications. And quite frankly, we move away from this sort of system of fear and much more to a culture that embraces that kind of sharing. And I do think we can appropriately deal with the liability issues. I'd rather be in a position of not having to go into court about people being hurt, but rather have the safer technologies that we're driving to in the first place so people don't get hurt in the first place. But people are going to get hurt from technologies, and there are risks, and that's not going to change. That's not what liability should be about.
And the idea here is if you do it right, if we're sharing and we have the transparency, and that was what I was trying to make the point, if we're doing it right and we all agree that this is the kind of transparency around it, then it's a protection. I mean, and there should be benefit from that for the companies that participate and do it that way.
So last question to all of you, and kind of feeding off from what you just shared, right? When I talk to my legal department, the one thing they tell me is, JiJo, give me a yes or no answer. Please don't give me something in between, because that is trouble. In this situation that we're talking about, how do we communicate when results are uncertain? I completely agree with you, Jeff. If it's positive or negative, we can deal with it. When the results are somewhere in the middle, how do you effectively communicate with patients? How do you communicate with other stakeholders?
Well, so I tell you, my challenge today is that we do get things that are in the middle. As Harlan was saying, you get these signals and you don't know if it's real or not. And our mechanism to figuring that out is often having a post-approval study. We get a 522 surveillance study, and guess what? In those cases, lack of interest for a lot of patients to enroll in the studies in the first place. They take a long time, and you're under a cloud. And guess what? If we are aware of a scenario and it's going to take a while, we're going to say something to the public. That is the worst position to possibly be in. If there's a signal, you want to answer that question quickly, which means you need the data infrastructure to answer the question quickly, and that's back to Nest. And we should be building out those capabilities about Nest. It isn't simply about more efficient evidence generation for new product to come on the market and expanding labeling indications. It is also on the safety side of, if there are issues, identify them quickly, and if there are signals, figure out if it's a real signal or not as quickly as possible.
Great. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I'm being shown an orange card with a big 0 on it, Steve, so I'm going to have to stop out here. Please join me in thanking the panel.